Today I want to talk to you about a very, very fascinating story that has popped up over the last week or so, which could have long-lasting implications for the way we shop. If you're a fan of using contactless payment in shops and things like that, then you are in luck, because the limit on a single payment using contactless card technology could rise to £100, more than double the current limit. As BBC News notes, the pandemic has led to larger amounts spent via contactless payments on debit cards, credit cards, and cards connected to smartphones. It's been less than a year since the limit was raised from £30 to £45. The Financial Conduct Authority, FCA, said it would consult shortly on a change in the rules. This is absolutely extraordinary, and it's worth pointing out from the outset that if you look at the history of contactless payments in the UK, we've adopted them quite rapidly over the last decade or so, and even more so in the last 5 years. Take a look at this chart right here. It shows the number of contactless transactions made each month over the last 5 years. Just 5 years ago, in February 2016, there were almost 160 million contactless transactions made in the UK. Fast forward to February 2020, 1 year ago, and that figure had risen to a peak of 888 million. Wow, 888 million. That is the peak right before the numbers fell slightly in March, and then of course plummeted in April following the lockdown that was implemented at that time. And so what you have now is a situation where during this lockdown, during the pandemic, more and more people have been encouraged to use contactless payment, because of course you want to try and limit the amount of contact that you have with a card reader. That's why it's called contactless. You do a simple tap. In fact, you don't even have to tap it, actually. You can just literally hover it above the screen and it will register. You don't want to be using chip and pin and touching too many things. So contactless has become the norm during the pandemic, and clearly the FCA have said this is clearly going to be a long-term trend. Why don't we ride the wave and increase the threshold further? And this point here about the fact that it's been less than a year since the threshold was raised from £30 to £45, and this really is a microcosm of how the pandemic has changed our lives completely. And it just goes to show, again, there's so many examples of this. You look at the working from home revolution, right? So many people could have worked from home before the pandemic, but just chose not to. Now, because of the pandemic, it's been forced upon us and we've had to adapt, and people like it. Now, with contactless payments, millions of people, hundreds of millions of people use contactless payments before the pandemic, but obviously it was for lower cost items. Now it's going to be expanded to, items up to £100. So it just goes to show you how much the pandemic has not necessarily brought about change, but has accelerated change in the way that we do things. Now, let's talk about smartphones for a second and contactless payment clients on smartphones, because as I've told you on this channel before, I'm a huge Apple fan, and one of my favourite things to do on my iPhone is to pay for things using Apple Pay. And it's important to remember that many of those contactless transactions that were conducted over the last 5 years will have been using services such as Apple Pay or Google Pay or Samsung Pay, things like that. Many retailers in the UK actually allow you to spend more than the £45 limit that we have at the moment. You can spend unlimited amounts using Apple Pay and Google Pay. Why? Because you have extra security authentication. On the iPhone, you have to use Touch ID or Face ID to make a transaction. On your Apple Watch, you're wearing your Apple Watch, which is what I do. I just use the Apple Watch, I tap it on the reel like that because it's connected to my wrist already, and I've used my iPhone to unlock the Apple Watch, so that's all secure. But Apple Pay is actually unlimited in most retailers. You can spend however much you want on Apple Pay, and online as well. If you buy something from the Apple Store online, you could spend £300, £400, £500, £1,000 even on a product, and because you have Face ID or Touch ID, you don't need to enter a PIN or your security code. Your card details are there. You can just use Apple Pay to authenticate. So we've already seen this online, and we've already seen this with smartphone payment clients. Now it's going to be mainstream, spending up to £100 in your everyday shop that you do. You might do the weekly shop, it might be £100. You will now be able to do all of that via contactless. It's absolutely remarkable. The FCA can set the boundaries of payments under its rules, but the card issuers would have the power to set the actual limits. I mean, there's no question in my mind that all of the big banks and all of the big card issuers would move towards a £100 limit. You know, banks have actually moved in unison already over the last few years in adopting contactless payment. It's something that the UK has been really good at. The US, things are more fragmented, so contactless has not been taken up as quickly, but over here it's been pretty swift and people seem to love it. Hopefully the FCA do end up making this change. I think it is much needed and will hopefully persuade more people to use contactless and services like Apple Pay, Google Pay, which are just so much easier than carrying cash. Certainly very welcome, and hopefully one that will be made really soon.